There is no substitute for innovation, right? You could have the best entrepreneurs, you could have the most sophisticated executives, you could have the smartest teams from Ivy Leagues. None of that really will get you out of the situation that you're in. You have to innovate yourself out of it. And oftentimes, innovation is the only answer, and it's the hardest thing to do.
Welcome to our podcast On the Ground Up, where we interview startup founders exploring their journeys, their success challenges, and lessons learned. We hope you be inspired in discovering what it takes to build a thriving startup. I'm your host, Jake Aaron Villarreal, and excited to have with us today Rana Gujral, founder of Behavioral Signals, an LA-based startup in the AI space. Rana, thanks for joining the show today.
It's a pleasure, Jake. Thank you for having me.
Great. So you've got a great story. We're going to talk about the company you built and how it mixes in with AI in today's world. And also we'll talk about you, kind of where it all started and where it began. It's a great story because it's different for the listeners that we talk to with other founders that really have a starting where you come into an accelerator, you come out of that, you build a product or you have an idea and you take that to market, you get funded and you hope for the best. But yours is more unique in the fact that you went into technology and then you had a very quick rise to success within the enterprise. From there, you came out of MIT and then applied your core skills in management consulting as well as turnaround companies. So maybe not all in that order, but we're going to start off. So just a little bit more background about you. Kind of walk us through, you're today a startup founder, you're an investor, you're probably a mentor. I know you contributed to articles for TechCrunch and Forbes magazine around technologies and innovation. Kind of how did this all begin for you?
It's been an amazing journey. And I feel I've been really fortunate to have had these many amazing experiences presented to me. My early days, as you just said, I've been in technology pretty much my entire career. My early days were in some early exploration around various other, I'd say, related aspects, but not quite programming. I started off as a programmer, had a lot of fun doing it. I realized that I wanted to go explore the other side of the business outside of building a product. And so management consulting was very alluring. So after I went to business school, I went into engagement consulting, marketing space for a bit. Realized I like building products better. So I came quickly back into building products and worked at some very large product and public companies where I was part of some iconic product journeys, some really amazing experiences. Had a lot of fun building Google TV, which was a early precursor to Chrome Stick back in the day, among other interesting product lines, which were in many ways ahead of its time. Like, for example, Logitech had this view of smart home and digital home, and this was a time when the homes were not smart, and there were very sort of disparate pieces of technology still coming together. But there was this vision that at some point it will be smart and there will be these building blocks. And so we started to sort of think about those things from various experiences, connected devices and connected experiences, including sort of like home security systems to home entertainment systems. And then I had this amazing opportunity to go be part of this turnaround journey at this iconic company that had been in business for over 25 years. At its heyday, it was doing close to $500 million in sales. And then things went down south, and this company was really close to being bankrupt. It was a few weeks out from folding up, and backed by big private equity players, there was a chance to sort of go work on a turnaround. So I jumped on that to go, explore that potential. And we had this amazing opportunity to go rebuild the product line, look at innovation from ground up, and bring the company back to life. Long story short, we were very successful in doing so. We were able to, turn around the EBITDA about 110 million in a little bit over 2 years. That happened very quickly, and eventually the company held a very successful IPO at 4.4 billion. I also had this innate desire to go do a company from grounds up, because at that point of my career, I had quite a bit of success in the corporate world, and I also had a good amount of success in building products that were successful. And outside of that, we had this amazing opportunity to turn around this company, which was quite a journey. But I wanted to sort of, explore what it takes to build a company from a paper napkin idea stage. Because that first, $1 million in sales, that first sort of client, which manifests from an idea you had, is a very different feeling, a very different experience. So I launched a company called Ties. This was a vertical SaaS. We built a workflow optimization engine that optimized the business processes of a very archaic industry, which was specialty chemicals, which had a lot of complex processes. And so we built the software systems very specifically for that industry. That's why it's called vertical SaaS. And we also used machine learning, which again was ahead of its time. We built these engines that predicted commodity prices ahead of 3 months out in the future. And we had some early success. Then we got acquired by, and then I went back to the corporate world for a bit, and then I've been part of this amazing journey at Behavioral Signals since. And Behavioral Signals is both a startup and it's also a mission. We're at the very core building essential building blocks of AGI that it will eventually lead to more empathetic interactions with machines down in the future. And in many ways, we've been focused on sort of doing things which haven't been done before. I mean, in the emotion behavioral space, for the most part, most of the companies were still looking at, like on the voice AI side, still very much sort of focused on the spoken word. So, you take a transcription engine or an ASR and convert the spoken word audio into the spoken word and then parse the words for meaning. And needless to say, it's not a very good way of doing it. I mean, you're losing many elements of a conversation when you're focused on just the word. And but the tone of voice has been, very elusive. It's very difficult. It's very hard to, get right. There was not enough data back in the day. So our co-founders also, have amazing chops in this field. And some of the early research was done inside of USC at Sale Labs, where some of these models were built to help, kids who suffered with autism. And, a lot of the kids who are autistic are super smart, but they struggle with understanding the emotional and behavioral quotient of the person that they're interacting with. So the thought process was, what if you can build a tool that could help them do so, like, in real time, help them assess what is the emotional behavioral state of mind of the person that they're interacting with. And so that's how it all started. And then we built these engines, which started to perform really well. But it took a long time, in machine learning and AI, you're always, especially if you're building an aspect that is closer to deep learning, which is a core human brain function, and you're trying to replicate that in the software system, you always have to sort of measure the progression in comparison to how well can a human do it. And where are you in terms of sort of that benchmark? And so that's sort of measured oftentimes by this number called an F-score. And F-score is, is a number typically between 0 and 1, 1 being the highest it can be, or 100%. And it's a combination of two things. One is precision, which is accuracy, and second is recall, which is false alerts. And so you'd benchmark a human capability and have an F-score of that. And a typical average human F-score for understanding emotions and behavior from the tone of voice is about 0.8. Obviously, females do this better than men. That's just known. Yeah, we've been all told this, and it's actually true. But on average, it's about 0.8, which means about 80% of the times we're right, and 20% of the times our brains are wrong in assessing the emotional behavioral quotient. And so when we started off, we quickly got to 0.5, 0.6, which was really exciting, but then it's not really sufficient to go build compelling business use cases on or solve industry problems. And it took a long time for us to get to 0.7, very, very long time to get to 0.8. And then we had a point of inflection, and then we, quickly crossed the human threshold, and currently we are sort of, beyond that. We're in the 0.9 category. And so then when you get to that point, things become really exciting, because now you have the software system that has replicated an essential brain function. And it is going to obviously play a huge role in the future AGI whenever that emerges. Because you're looking at building an AI that is more and more like human, and these essential brain functions really quantify what it means to be a human. And so now you can have a software system assess the emotional behavioral context of a conversation and of an individual real time from these non-verbal cues, which is pitch and tonal variance, intonations, prosody. And so, that's the space that we're playing in. And obviously, many different applications. We have a core business focus around optimizing interactions between call center agents and the customers that are calling in. But the technology can also be applied in many other industry sectors, and we do dabble in some other ancillary areas in parallel as well. So, yeah, it's been quite a journey, and it continues.
Yeah, no, it's great. I want to go back to one thing you mentioned, and I have a couple questions. One, you said that women were better, or at least more, I don't know, maybe more emotionally connected to the tone of being able to listen to communication and maybe understand what that person's feeling. How is if it's statistically or it's ranked that way, what is it that you think they have that men don't have?
Are you specifically talking about sort of male female comparison?
You mentioned that in your studies or when you were working through your research rather.
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily totally understood. There's a lot of brain functions, there's a lot of brain capabilities or human capabilities that we don't really understand. It is what it is. What we can do is we can measure it, right? So we could sort of try to understand sort of like the points of differences. Why do they exist? I don't know if I personally completely totally understand why those differences occur. In fact, interestingly, I'd say we've been able to replicate, and this is an interesting paradigm in AI. For example, when you're trying to replicate a brain function, like we did for extracting these signals from tone of voice, we took a stab at a hypothetical direction that we could take to go do so. And you'd build a model, and then you'd train the model, and then you'd see how the model performs, and you keep tweaking it. And if you don't get the right results, you build a different model and you try out different ideas. And then suddenly either it works or it continues to not work, and you keep trying. But let's say it works, and in our case it worked, and now we have this model that performs really well. But we don't really know if that model replicates how the human does it, right? So we've found a way, but has it actually cracked the code of how humans do it? We don't know. So a lot of these things are still mysteries for us. There's potentially many different ways to get to those endpoints. A lot of this is a bit of an experimentation.
Yeah. We hear that a lot with companies in AI where there's a lot of lab testing and you finally figure out what you're trying to get, and then you continue to iterate and move forward, and you find your market or you find the applications that it suits. Walk us through a little bit about the applications that you talked about, call center and things like that, but give us a specific use case where maybe you first started applying it and you found that, okay, we have a market here. What was that, and how did you find that market?
We actually tested a variety of different ideas before narrowing on to, the use case that we're focused on today. When you're talking about applying a capability that understands the emotional behavioral quotient and also the state of mind, But let me describe the technology a little bit better. That will be a good sort of building block to this conversation. So what our engine does is, in a real live conversation like ours, which could include two parties or multiple parties, it could extract signals real time, specifically focused on the nonverbal cues, which means it's not processing the spoken word. At no point you're using an ASR to take the audio, converting that into actual words. So your words don't matter. Your language doesn't matter. You could be having this conversation in any language. Your dialects or accents don't matter. And then from the nonverbal cues, which is pitch and tonal variance, intonations, prosody, and etc., you are extracting signals, but the signals that you're extracting can be bucketed into three categories. First, there is the bucket of emotions, like anger, happiness, sadness. There's a whole range of emotions you can tap into. Then there is the bucket of behaviors like engagement, empathy, politeness, etc. Then there's this super interesting bucket, which is you're taking some of these low-level signals and combining them towards a greater level of understanding of a mental state or a behavioral state. You call it some advanced classifiers. So this is where you could identify someone's level of experience or satisfaction. Let's say, customer satisfaction or overall satisfaction in the moment live. So think of this as a live NPS score, or your engagement meter. But also very interesting things such as stress. Like, are you stressed? Let's see how stressed are you. Or you're under some sort of a duress, or control. Control's interesting. Control's more of, you're saying something, but do you want to say it, or is someone making you say it? Detecting that. And intent. I mean, you could do very complex intent markers, which is intent for an action or intent to not do an action. And you could identify that real time. So you could intend to, like, propensity to pay. That would be in a debt collection scenario. Propensity to buy, which is in a sales scenario. So all of those things are possible from the core tech. You could apply this core technology in many different industry verticals. You could certainly apply it on the healthcare side. There's a lot of research now that's being done that you could predict certain pathologies using certain vocal biomarkers, and also just sort of well-being, etc. But the most but the two sort of broad areas of application. One is human-to-human interactions, and then there is human-to-machine interactions. The human-to-human interactions mostly happen in the business setting. So this is where most of our human-to-human business interactions happen in call centers. Everything is digitized. You're not necessarily walking into a business anymore. You're interacting with them by calling them, and so that's one big area of optimization, because it's still very much broken, as you would know. And then there's a human-to-machine interaction, which is building these machines that you can talk to, but having a more human-like experience or interaction with these machines. So giving these machines, which is in a voice conversation with you or voice interaction with you, the ability of a human to understand the emotions and the behaviors from your tone, so that they can be more accurate in their responses or more empathetic in their responses. So those are sort of the two areas. So we tested a lot of those areas, both on the human-to-machine side and on the human-to-human communication side. And one opportunity eventually we narrowed down onto was actually quite interesting, which was, first off, what we were able to do was to, create what we call a conversational bioprint of a person based on a previous audio interaction. What is this? Well, a bioprint, conversational bioprint, is really, it's a vector file of, between 75 to 100 attributes that range from various things such as, how do you converse? How do you speak? Do you speak fast? Do you speak slow? What emotions and behaviors do you typically exude in a conversation that's unique to you? Among other things. So, various attributes between 75 to 100. But when you put it all together, there's this one bioprint that encapsulates a deep understanding of how you converse. And you would have one that's unique to you. I would have one that's unique to me. It's very similar to, a fingerprint, which makes us unique as individuals. Once you have those bioprints, you can use those bioprints to make intelligent decisions around who should be paired with who if there's a conversation to happen, to ensure that there's going to be a great flow of the conversation. You're going to have a good dialogue, good conversation. And if you are able to pair people together who are bound to have a great conversation, it automatically directly impacts whatever is the outcome of that conversation, whether that's customer satisfaction or sales or debt collection or whatever that is. So we were able to build that product, which has never been built before, right? So there's been products that do this matchmaking, but they use very different approaches. They use complex Bayesian heuristics, use a lot of data, public data sets, etc., but not really essentially using a bioprint that can be created real time using tone of voice, and then matchmaking can happen dynamically real time using these voice engines. And then bam, two people are put together who are bound to have a great conversation. So that's the product we brought to market. It's called AI mediated conversations. Obviously, it's very well suited for call centers. A lot of the clients that we have are financial institutions, banks, collection houses, BPOs, etc. And they're using it to optimize the client experience, but also optimize the various outcomes that they want to optimize. So you could tune the matching towards the outcome that you require. And it's very interesting the way it works. Is like, I'll just give you one more anecdote. We've all been in one of the two situations, or both of those situations that I'll describe. One would be, let's say you're discussing something with someone and it's actually some sort of a negotiation, and it's a tense adversarial conversation. You're trying to get your point across, and the other person trying to get their point across, and it becomes really engaged and gnarly and tense. And you walk out of that conversation without being able to get your point across. So in some ways you lose that discussion, but you feel good about that dialogue. You talk to yourself and you say, I didn't get my point across, or I didn't win that dialogue, but boy, that was a good conversation. I feel good about it. That's one instance. And there's a second instance where, you met someone at a party, or it's a casual meetup. You're not discussing anything controversial. You're not negotiating anything. It's not tense. It's just casual conversation. And about 5 minutes, you're like, I can't stand it. Someone help me, get me out of here. And so it's like, why does that happen, right? And again, there's a situation where you try to get something addressed, and you're calling a call center, and you maybe had a couple of conversations, and you're heated, you're tense. I mean, you have an agenda, and you call, and someone picks up, and all they do is greet you and ask you for your name, and that's it. And you've made up your mind it's not going to go well. You're like, oh no, not him or her, right? And you instantly know. And sometimes, some people just hang up then and there and redial to get a different agent. And it's because, sometimes those bioprints click, they match randomly, and you get the person who matches your conversational rhythm. And other times it clashes. And what we make happen is we maximize the chances that it always matches versus clashing. And there's no technology like that exists in the world today outside of what we built, because you'd need a human psychologist on both sides doing that matchmaking to make that happen. But AI can do it at scale.
That's incredible. I know we're in the business, we recruit, and we have, I've interviewed 20,000 people. And in that process, I'm sure there's many people that I felt and they felt weren't compatible with me, or me with them, or the opportunity. So the question I have is, how quickly can you create, or can the AI understand the bioprint and then make that match happen, whether it's switching from this call center person to that call center person based on matching that bioprint to that type of person? How much conversation is needed before you can actually define it?
Yeah. So we're getting better and better at this. At this point today, we can create a bioprint from an interaction that's anywhere between 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes in length. We don't need any more, right? So 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes is enough of a dialogue to create a bioprint for both parties. If there are two parties in a conversation, you can create a bioprint for both. And then, and you could do it real time. Real time in the sense like live, not real time, I guess. So as soon as you have enough data, in 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, you can create that bioprint. And then you could also sort of, use that to match make real time, from that perspective. Now, we're working on certain improvements, which when we get to, you could potentially create a bioprint with maybe a few seconds, like 15, 20 seconds, or, about that of interaction. And when you do that, you're potentially going to be able to create a bioprint of at least the client when the client's interacting with the IVR system, which is not even human, right? So this is the IVR pre-recorded system, the very annoying system, which asks you these questions, you know, if it's this, press this, if it's that, press this. And, it's about a minute gone before you get to your agenda. But you could create a bioprint then and there. And so by the time it comes to that they are ready to speak to a human, you could quickly match because you already have the bioprints of the agents.
Right.
That's the easy part.
Right.
And you could do a live matchmaking there. You don't need a previous conversation in place to do the matchmaking.
That's great. So once you have that compatibility match, the odds are it's going to improve the outcome of that conversation, whether it's, appeasing a unhappy customer or collecting that data or that money that you're owed, whatever it happens to be in debt collection. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, so when you bring the right two people together and increase the chances of a great conversation, everything else remaining untouched or same, which means they're the same agents that you had with the same training that you had, and there's certainly the similar type of clients that you had with the same problems and use cases, but you're just having two humans come together, having a great conversation. You have a better satisfied agent, more engaged agent. You have a better satisfied client, more satisfied client, and your outcomes, whether that be more sales or debt collection or whatever that situation be, increase. So we're currently tracking double-digit improvements in all the KPIs, whereas the typical industry, uses anywhere from 1% to 3% as big wins in terms of the improvements with the software technologies that you use. That's because you're using different capabilities to get to those results, and we're using human psychology and human compatibility that can be used real time to bring the right two people together, and then let nature take its course.
Yeah, there's so many applications for this product. I'm excited to see where it goes and the growth of it. Let's go back a little bit in terms of the company itself. How big are you today, employee-wise? And talk about the funding. How much have you raised? What round? And who has led or who's been part of your funding?
Yeah, so we tend to keep some of our round sizes a little bit under wraps. We're still working towards a few milestones, but I'll give you some high levels. We're still relatively small. We're headquartered out of LA with teams in San Francisco Bay Area, LA, of course, but also a very targeted R&D research team in Athens in Greece. So those are the three locations. We have a few other people that are spread out in different parts of US, but those are our three locations that we primarily work out of. We've done 4 rounds, and they're still early rounds, and we've had some really good investors who have supported us through this journey. Kairos Ventures out of LA, Rogue Ventures, and Brook Straight Equity, and also Incutel, which is a very interesting firm. They are CIA's VC firm, a very sophisticated deep tech investor. We just closed a recent round, and we have a brand new investor join our team as well, CS Ventures, which is founded by Russ Carson, the iconic Russ Carson. And so excited to have them on board as well.
That's great. When you get investors on board, there's always a strategic aspect of it. You hope they bring something to the table. Maybe it's they have a bigger network, they bring clients, They can get you inroads to new opportunities. Your founders seem like or your investors seem like there's some really good diversity there. Out of that, where do you think the biggest opportunity is for your product as you go forward?
Yeah, I mean, we're exploring new directions while we are very focused on building on our core opportunity. And as I said, our core focus is optimizing these interactions in a contact center by, using the behavioral psychology and voice AI to really sort of like, bring the best out of every human out there, right? So for example, so we would say, it's less about training, it's less about saying you have a bad agent or a good agent. There's no good agents or bad agents, they're just humans. And humans are not necessarily always compatible, right? They have their unique aspects. But if you maximize the potential of their uniqueness, you can bring the best out of them and also bring the best outcomes to your business. And so that's a capability that is then made possible by this product, AI Immediate Conversations. That remains a core. So we're very focused on building that out. We have also taken a slightly, I'd say, unconventional path of, going after more of a enterprise rollout versus, sort of a SaaS offering, which, has its pros and cons. And so, but because of the path that we have chosen, we are largely selling right now through channels, through large channel partners like, Genpact, through DDCOM, ENY, among others. So those are the channel partners that we're focused on. And so that remains a core, and we continue to focus on that. But outside of that, we've recently started to explore some very interesting use cases, which are not related to our core, and which is applying our technology towards use cases that are in the law enforcement and national security realm. And we have various capabilities around understanding, modeling, and tracking variances in behavioral mapping. And you could use that for some of those use cases. We have capabilities around also sort of, understanding threat, understanding elements of fraud or trustworthiness. We actually have done a lot of work in the area of deepfakes, and some of the things that we'll be announcing soon, we haven't publicly announced yet. So stay tuned on that. And also, improving the current capabilities that exist in sort of the polygraph world, so to say, right, which is very inadequate and problematic, and sort of we could really improve on those areas. So some of those things we're sort of like just starting the journey on, and so we are working with some government clients towards some of the interesting use cases in that space. And we'll continue to do that. I think, those use cases are very synergistic to our core, so it's not a distraction. We're using the same building blocks that we have to go solve a slightly different problem, but also some of the things that we're building specifically for that market, we're able to bring it back into our core offering. Because banks are just as interested in predicting an intent to fraud or assessing trustworthiness, etc. A big problem now, but I think it will be a massive problem, in the era of deepfakes, and where most of the conversations are. Most of the banks are potentially eventually at some point going to become neobanks, right? Even the traditional banks are mostly operating as neobanks today. How often do you actually go to a bank branch? There's not a lot of reasons to. And so, your interactions are then largely all digital and voice-based. And so some of these tools become really, really important.
Yeah, that's really cool. You mentioned something I think is interesting. You talked about your product and getting into the market through channel partners. And I know that for a lot of companies, you think you got to build a product, get to market, and then build a sales team and sell it and get out there as a startup and get your brand in front of customers. But, almost every big company has a channel partner channel, and it's a significant amount of revenue for them. It's also a strategic direction you might want to take your company. But I think it's really, how did you even begin to start to build a channel partner?
Yeah, I'd say when you are taking a step towards enterprise sales, you'll realize quickly enough, especially so if you are building something that is new and cutting edge, like an AI implementation, is that, let's say you built a product that hits bang on target on the KPIs that the client wants. It's exactly the problem they're looking to solve, and you're solving it in a massive way, which makes you making a massive improvement, that doesn't mean that they can buy from you, by the way, right? So you could go to Goldman Sachs or Citibank and say, you have this big problem, or they come to you and say, we have this big problem, and we could solve this and we can fix it. Let's show you how. And it's not unhypothetical. You could actually also do a full A/B test and do a measure on that, and you could show the ROI on that. But that still doesn't mean that they can buy from you. There's a lot of complexity in implementation and deployment, right? And it's a collection of things ranging from just the complexity of the technical stack, where you have so many different pieces in it, and you have this new pieces that you want to add that needs to integrate and operate peacefully and safe and coexist with that stack. But also there's regulations, there's compliance, there's GDPR, there's SOC 2, there's AI and PI2 considerations, then there are unique country laws, etc. Then there is the risk assessment. Even if you pass on all of those things, vendor onboarding in some of these companies, which you only start after you've closed the deal, which could take about a year or a year and a half, can last for 2 years, up to 2 years, right? So you're looking at 3 to 4 years to go get your product running, where you could do that in 3 weeks, right? I mean, technically you could just deploy and ready, but that doesn't mean so. Channel partners are immensely valuable to go solve that complexity, especially for a small, relatively new AI player in the market that is building something that is, first of its kind. It's cutting edge. If you're building something more commoditized, then it's somewhat easier. And so I think, the channel partners play a huge role. And I think we learned that fairly early on, that we do direct sales as well, but it's a lower part of our strategy, just because a lot of the clients that we're going out after large accounts and with larger deals. And most of these clients are very large companies, and many of them are public companies, public banks, and financial institutions. And the benchmark for security and compliance is just extraordinarily high. We do have some advantages on our side that, we don't really have a lot of PI that we touch or personally identified information, because we're primarily focused on the tone of voice, which means we're not ever using handling the data that is personally identifiable. Like in many ways, we're GDPR ready out of the box, because there's nothing to redact. We don't even take the audio, convert that into text. But even so, there are other considerations that come to play. So for us, we had to do it. We had no choice, and I feel that's the right strategy for something like the product that we're bringing to market.
Yeah. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, you're more unique than other entrepreneurs, where you've, been at startups, you've done the turnaround, you understand enterprise, of that experience, specifically being at a turnaround, having to make some hard decisions, maybe having to let people go, having to tighten up the funding, figuring out how to redirect or pivot the company. What's one or two of the biggest lessons that you learned that you've applied to your current startup, or maybe even your previous startup, that's been really beneficial?
There are a lot of lessons, a lot of experiences, a lot of takeaways. I'll tell you about one specific aspect of that turnaround. So when we looked at turning around this company, it had a very iconic brand with a very loyal following in the market, and the customers really were begging and screaming for this company to be saved. So we felt that was very promising. There is certainly a fan base that wants this company to survive. But when you look at a turnaround, right, and you look at a turnaround, especially at that scale, where the company was close to $300 million in debt at that point, and you look at, okay, how do you bring it back to profitability? You look at all the obvious pieces, right? So you have like these 5 offices. One of them is this swanky and executive suite, and I mean, you guys are bankrupt. Why do you have that, right? Literally at that time, I recall there was this beautiful office with 7 floors, and the 7th floor was this massive, 10,000-15,000 square feet space with 7 offices for 7 executives, each about 2,000 square feet office with a live-in executive assistant. So you look at all that stuff and you're like, okay, that's got to go, right? And so those things have to change. You have to cut cost. You're also looking at people, who's the right team, who's not the right team. So you have to, get the right team assembled towards the new goal that you have. And you're fixing up various business processes and everything. All of those things make sense. But we quickly realized that none of that is going to actually eventually help. You're too deep down, and yeah, they'll all help a little bit, but it's not going to get you out of that hole. And so then what do? Right? And so we actually realized that, okay, the only way you could actually help turn this company around is by bringing something so disruptive and innovative to the market that the market's never seen before. So we had to go back to the ground board and say, okay, let's take a look at the product and the experience that we're selling and everything that's wrong with it. And what would be the utopian experience, forgetting about the engineering piece or whether it's possible or not. If you were to just dream it, if you had to dream that experience, what would it take? What would that experience look like? I mean, let's say this is the concept car model, right? Which is like, some of those are not practical in reality. And so, I mean, this particular product had a lot of complexity. So it's like a 3D printer type of a device, not a 3D printer. It's like more of a device that you could design on a software system, and then it cuts, writes, embosses. So it's a lot of mechanical pieces, all very robotic, which had to be calibrated and set up by a very non-technical, consumer. And so you look at it and say, can you replace this with like a dial? That would be more prevalent in, say, a washing machine or a microwave, because when you're doing a load of laundry, you're not really, calibrating the temperature and the spin cycles. You're just putting it on and the machine takes care of everything. Can you do that in a mechanical robotic device? There's a different level of complexity. And so when we knew what would it take to disrupt, we then just decided to go ahead and try it out. And at that time, it was more of the impossibility of that. And a lot of people said it can't be done. And then they left. And then there were some crazies who said, I think it can be done. It's like, okay, come on, let's start. Let's join, build this out. And it just worked. I mean, and so it made it happen. And then it's rest is history. Right. And so I think, the big lesson is sometimes there is no substitute for innovation. Right. You could have the best entrepreneurs. You could have the most sophisticated executives. You could have the smartest teams from Ivy Leagues. Not to say that Ivy Leagues are the smartest. And oftentimes, my experiences, it's been the reverse. But none of that really will get you out of the situation that you're in. You have to innovate yourself out of it. And oftentimes, innovation is the only answer, and it's the hardest thing to do. And so I keep reminding myself about that, right? I mean, so building a startup is a super hard journey. Everything is going wrong oftentimes. I mean, you're dealing with, team issues, investor issues, product issues, all of those situations. But if you're innovating, I tell myself you're on the right track. You keep innovating. Have you moved the needle in innovation? Have you done something unique? Have you built something that is, really worth sort of being proud of? Then you're on the right track. I mean, other things fall in line. And you could continue to focus on flawless execution and all of those things, and you still won't get anywhere in the long term.
Yeah, well said. God, Rana, everything you're talking about is captivating. I feel like I could talk to you all day long here. But I know we got to wrap up. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to share?
I think we've had a really good conversation, so I can't come up with a particular thing. I'd ask you maybe a question in terms of like, what has your biggest learning been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs? I mean, how does that sort of compare with some of the things that you've seen yourself?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of listening to lots of entrepreneurs and talking to them about how they're going about their business or innovating or trying to get to market, I think it's all the path, I think, is fairly similar. I think there's just different places you start and different problems you're trying to solve. So for us, it's always about, what's the person, like what's inside that person that really is going to be able to understand the problem at hand and be able to solve it. And we hear their stories about, they're looking to the abyss, their funds are running out, they don't know where to go, and they figure out how to get it done. I think sometimes you just got to show up. I think it's just like a day-to-day
Yeah.
thing. You just show up and eventually you start to find your path. And it seems to be a reoccurring theme that we hear.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think you always know where you're going to end up. And myself, I've had my own companies as well. As sometimes you're going through the forest and you're not sure where the destination, and you just keep going, and eventually you see it, and then you focus and you keep going and you get there. It feels great. But you have those ups and downs, those ebb and flows that can be scary, they can be exciting, they could be questionable at times. I think you just keep going. And your experience to me is maybe more interesting than others, because you've been at the enterprise level, you've been at companies that were not going the right direction, and having to turn them around. It's not just about turning the company around, you have to turn people around.
Yeah,
And
very
to do
much so.
that, you lose them or they're with you
Right.
and you move forward. So I think it's fascinating, and love to talk to more founders that have gone through that experience. I think there's a lot of pivot stories in there. For startups, you have an idea and you have to pivot left or right as you go. But when you're starting in the wrong direction and it's a complete pivot, I think that experience has got to be very different. So that's kind of just my thoughts. If people wanted to find you or find your company, Behavioral Signals, where would they go to do that?
Yeah, so go to behavioralsignals.com. And, if you're working on something interesting, which you think might be sort of worth a discussion, I'm fairly, well present on social media. So you could reach me on Twitter, my first and the last name, Rana Gujral, or, anywhere else, LinkedIn. Happy to chat.
Well, Rana, thanks for joining us today. And thanks for all the listeners that are listening. It means the world to me and to us. My name is Jake Aaron Villarreal, and we're signing off for now, but can't wait to connect with you again soon on the next episode. Take care. Before we wrap up, I want to give a big shout out to all the entrepreneurs that have joined to make this podcast possible, and for all the listeners for listening. It means the world to me that you chose to spend your time with us today. I'm your host, Jake Aaron Villarreal, signing off for now, but can't wait to connect with you all soon on the next episode. Take care. This show is sponsored by Match Relevant, a company that helps venture-backed startups find the best people in the market, and they do it in 3 simple steps. First, they sit down with founders to understand their story. Second, they tell their story into multiple candidate channels. And third, they schedule interviews within 48 hours. Find us at matchrelevant.com to learn more about how we do it.